Welcome to the Garden of Edun. Dami be asking the questions for the answers that you want to hear. All you gotta do is sit back, grab a chair, or listen up while you clean and cook. Take a leaf from the creative's book. These gems open your mind and your heart. Okay, the show's gonna start. Cheese! Welcome back to the Garden of Edun podcast. I'm your host, Dami Edun. And first off, Merry Christmas. I hope you guys enjoyed having some time off with your family and loved ones, eating, drinking, chilling, just not really doing much. That is what the time is there for. So I hope you enjoyed. This week, as you could probably tell from the quality of the camera, to the surroundings, to the fucking mic here, it's a special episode. Different type of episode, actually. It's an episode of reflection. And, I guess a lot of people coming into the beginning of a new year, 2022, are going to be looking at certain things that they might want to try, whether that's drawing, whether that's writing something substantial, whether that's moving to another country. And I guess for myself, I remember a time where I, in my head, was thinking, I really want to do this podcasting thing. And while I am still quite early in my journey, I think about 25 episodes deep, there's a little bit that I can share with you that might be quite helpful. And, it's a different style of video. If it goes well, if people like it, great, I can record them again. If not, it's fine. It's good to test these things out. And I do hope it gives you some value. So today, to get mainly to the point, I'm going to share 10 things that I wish I knew before I started podcasting, and hopefully that will give some people some insight and also some encouragement for when they start, depending on where they are in their minds with that, or could just be something interesting that you want to listen to and learn about what I've experienced. So yeah, I hope you enjoy. So, lesson number 1, which I think is the most important lesson to learn, and that is that you're going to be shit when you start. And the best way to get over that is just to really accept it. When I did my first podcast with my boy Xylon Genesis, shout out my guy, he's got an EP out recently, Chapter X/Strategist. Bangers. I mean, come on guys, you need to go check that shit out. I'll probably put the link somewhere in my bio, actually, in the episode title somewhere. So yeah, when I did my first episode with Xylon Genesis, I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but when I look back on it, it was actually quite I don't want to say it was shit, but it wasn't. It was the necessary starting point for me to get comfortable with actually being in the format of a podcast where I host it, having good questions. It was not probably the best podcast ever, but it was important to start and accept that I would be shit so that I could keep going and improve. And hopefully for those people who've watched the first one and, watched a few of the others more recently, they can see that there's been a massive improvement, hopefully. But I think initially starting off, you have to be comfortable and accept that it's going to be shit, because, if you're comfortable with that, then it's much easier to start building up towards a process, which is so important with podcasting. And I'll get more into that later, actually, about the process. So yeah, lesson number 1, you're going to be shit to start with, and just accept it. Okay, lesson number 2, and that is equipment doesn't matter so much at the start. And this kind of ties into what I said earlier about you're going to be shit at the start. I think what can block a lot of people is feeling like they need so much equipment. They need the DSLR, they need the 300 plus pound mic, they need the headphones that have crystal clear clarity and the lights that fucking people use in them school photo shoots and all these different bits of equipment. And I think it can be quite a creative excuse to get out of that first one, which is that you're going to be shit at the start. I think the most important thing actually is to get comfortable with actually creating the content in whatever format it is, and accept that through the process of doing the podcast, you'll start to learn different nuances, and you'll start to see, okay, this is something that I can invest some money into, take the quality of the podcast up a level, or, oh, I've noticed that, you know, the mic quality isn't so great, so let me upgrade the mics, or what software can I use, especially with something like a virtual podcast, which I have mainly at the moment, is what recording software can I use to just improve the quality of the visual a little bit. And I think being comfortable with starting with whatever equipment you have is going to allow you to get started and to actually do the podcast much more easily than if you need all the equipment. And the other thing is, if you're on a budget, as you start off, the numbers are going to be fucking low. Like, that's just the nature of the game. And if you've invested so much in at the start without actually learning whether you're going to enjoy the process, it's going to be kind of difficult to keep going. So I would say your equipment at the start doesn't matter. Just start with what you have, laptop Zoom, or, you know, just a little mic that may not be the best, and just get started, because at the beginning, the audience probably isn't going to be that big. I mean, if your audience is already big, then you probably might want to invest in something, because you're going to have a lot of people watching that will make investing into the equipment have business sense. But if you're starting off small, I, from a personal standpoint, would say just roll with what you have and just improve as you go along. I think if the conversation, or if the guests, or if the topic is interesting enough, you know, you'll get that initial spark, and as you go along, you can keep improving, as long as it's listenable and digestible, and not, you know, you can't take anything from it. And as long as people can actually get value from it, then I think the quality is subjective anyway, and you can always improve the quality of the equipment. So that's tip number 2. So tip number 3, and this is a little bit of a full circle moment, because this is what I'm actually doing right now. And I think it's having the space, or giving yourself the space and time to experiment with different formats and different ways that you can add value to the podcast. So initially, when I started the podcast, it was actually going to be a conversation specifically about certain topics around creativity. So procrastination, self-doubt, low confidence, all these things, and focusing on those as individual topics. But what I actually came to find, especially through the first podcast and then the second, third, is I actually really mostly enjoyed finding out about the creative stories of the creative people that I get on the podcast, and taking lessons from their own journeys and learning from that, because I enjoyed it, first and foremost. Oh God, there's a plane going by. Not ideal. Or helicopter even. Not ideal. Fuck off. As I was saying, you can try a few different things at the start, especially because you don't have a big audience initially, usually. So you can experiment with certain things, and for the little people that are giving you feedback, and by little I mean little in terms of size, you know, you're not going to get 10,000 people saying, hey, I like this, I don't like this. It's probably going to be 1 or 2 people around you, and you can start inferring from there, but you still have the room to be creative and try out new things. And I would say you should definitely allow room for that, which is what I'm doing right now. So the 4th tip that I actually think is quite important is, it only really makes sense to assess your progress once you've built momentum. And the reason I say that is because when you look at anybody that has, I guess, achieved great success with social media platform, or insert other endeavor here, you tend to find that the people that have built momentum are the ones that are able to achieve something substantial, because people are now like, okay, I'm waiting for this podcast or this episode or this video or this thing from that person, especially, YouTube or the other audio podcast platforms. And then on a personal level myself, I've started to see what I've started to be able to assess my performance a bit more easily when I've been able to be consistent, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to release an episode every 2 weeks and see what the traction's like, see how interested people are in it. And even now, I've only been consistent for, I think, about 10 episodes, and that's a very small scale, but it's just been a lot easier to assess, because if you release episode one, I don't know, every week for 3 weeks and then don't release for another month, especially starting off, it's hard to assess where you actually are. And that's something I made the mistake of a lot. That's a mistake that I made a lot when assessing my progress, because I wasn't actually taking into account that I needed momentum to actually be able to do a thorough assessment. And so I would say for anybody starting, before you assess where you are and how things are going, make sure you've just got consistency and momentum first for a good period of time, because then you're actually seeing the true value of what you're doing, as opposed to, oh, why did this only get 5 views this time? Well, it's probably because you haven't released for a month. And this isn't preachy, this is self-reflection on my end. So I'm just giving that information to you. So yeah, that's tip number 4. Don't assess your progress until you've built a level of momentum up to be able to actually get a real, true sense of what you're doing and how well it's doing. So tip number 5, which is actually quite an interesting one, because I think this, again, is one that I struggle with and one that I know I should be doing a lot more of. And I think a lot of people struggle with because it's wrapped up in our identities. And that is, the more you post your clips on social media, the more that people are going to watch said video. I mean, it sounds like it makes sense, right? The more you post, the more chances you're giving yourself of people watching or listening to your podcast. But I think for a lot of us, we can get a bit insecure about the quality of our work, or whether people are engaging, or am I posting too much about X, Y, Z? And most of the videos that have, or podcast episodes that have got the most views or the most listens are the ones that have been shared the most through social, whether by me or by me and the guest, or mostly by the guest. Obviously, sometimes it can depend on the guest, their own audience sizes. But if you're posting your own content on a regular basis, it gives people who, one, may not have seen the first time you posted or the second time you posted, and maybe the 5th time you posted, are like, oh, I hadn't seen this before, really, and they go and check out the podcast. Or you might have people who see the clips, like the clips, and they just need to see it a few more times to actually decide, oh, go on then, I've seen 5, 6 really good clips on this podcast, I'm actually going to go watch it. And again, not preaching, this is, again, a kind of a level of self-reflection for myself too. The more clips you post on social, the more people are going to see it. It's almost like, you're increasing your odds by placing more bets. And because social media is free, the bets are free. So the more that you make, the more chances that you have of being seen. And so that is lesson number 5 for everybody. Post more on social, you're going to get more traction. Simple. The point I'd like to add to that is, as long as the content is engaging, entertaining, informative, and actually adds value to the people watching it, if you embed that into those clips that you're posting on social, then the more you post, the more people are going to watch it. Simple. And so, yeah, that's lesson number 5. Okay, now we're at lesson number 6, which is you have to put in work to get guests on your podcast. And this is more of a bit of advice for people that want to have a podcast where they're getting guests on regularly. If you're just doing some with your friends or with a regular host, I guess this doesn't apply. But if you are going to be somebody who's getting other people on, you have to put in work to get guests on. Like, you have to make sure you're sending DMs, sending emails, making sure you follow up, making sure you really, I guess you have to kind of treat it as a sales in some sense. Like, you're going to have to follow up on your leads, and you're going to have to make it as easy as possible for the person on the other end to come on your podcast, and do that in whichever way you think is the best way to sell that. And, one of the tools that I use is Calendly, which is this scheduling tool. So instead of going back and forth saying, are you free Monday? No. Are you free Wednesday evening? No. How about Sunday morning? No. What about Monday at midnight? No. Instead, you use Calendly to show in your calendar the time that you have free, and send it to somebody, and they can just pick a slot that fits their own schedule. So it's really simple. It means you don't have to go back and forth on message. They can just pick a time that works for them. And if you're doing your podcast virtually, then you can link your Zoom account to the Calendly to your Calendly schedule. So it means it books it straight into your calendar with the Zoom link that's needed and in their calendar. So it just makes the process smoother. But any other kind of tools that you need to make things easy for your guest will make it easier to book them. And that's just something that I just wasn't aware of myself. I don't know why, but yeah, it's work, and you have to just be ready for that work to get guests on. So I would say message quite a few people at the same time, and, work from there, because then you can start getting things scheduled ahead of time, so that, you're not left with a week where you're like, fuck, I don't have an episode ready. Just takes away that stress. But tip number 6, you have to put in work to get your guests. Tip number 7, and this is something that I think will make sense after you've done a few episodes, but that is to pay attention to the small number of people that are listening to your show. I think it's really important. You have to think of it this way. You're starting off at a really small level, and basically no one gives a fuck about what you're doing at this point when you start, right? No one cares. No one cares, because you're not the guy or the gal or the person, and you haven't shown the consistency that makes people go, oh yeah, they're a podcaster, and really keep that in mind. So you have to give attention to the people that are listening to your show. Like, really make sure they feel valued, and that you show your appreciation for them, and also take their feedback on board, because they're the small number of people actually giving you the time of day, to actually watch and listen to your podcast. So really take on board what they're saying, because those people are the keys to actually making something substantial. Because if you engage with them, show them your appreciation, and actually make improvements for your podcast. Ooh. Fucking hell, that's a glitch that I'm defo keeping in. If you add those improvements that they need, then they're more likely to share it with their friends. And, sharing is the real superpower of social media, of content, of this world. If people share it, more people see it, gives you more chances of people liking it, gives you a bigger audience, etc., and you could create whatever you want, is what I've observed anyway. And I'd say is a lesson that I think I've been applying a bit more going forwards. But yeah, it's just something that I'm gonna do for as long as I'm in this content world, because those people are giving you their time, man, and time is finite. So lesson number 7, pay attention to those people who are listening, and take on board their feedback, show appreciation to those people. So lesson number 8, and this is this is one that I love, and to be fair, might not be easy for some of you to pull off if you don't have this skill set, or you're too scared, or you don't know anyone who can do it for you for a cheap rate. But man, having a theme song actually helps. So the tip is having a custom-made theme song actually gives your podcast a little bit of weight, actually. So a few months ago, or a couple of months ago, I was watching Gary V's Tea with Gary V podcast, and there's a theme song that he has here. This is Tea with Gary V, sipping empathy, giving out all my shit for free, something like that. Anyway, basically every time it comes on, I would always be like rocking, jamming to the intro, and then skip over to another podcast that I listen to, Rio Ferdinand's Live with Five or Vibe with Five podcast. I can't even remember the name, but I do know the theme song. I mean, I don't know the lyrics, but every time it comes on, I'm like, yeah, this shit's about to start. And then I thought to myself, what if I do that for myself? So I went around looking for an instrumental, and then I wrote a few bars for it, spat it for a few people, they liked it, and I've added it to the podcast. And it's really funny because a lot of people have actually given me really good feedback on the intro. I mean, there might be some people out there that hate it and think I'm a shit rapper or can't spit, whatever. Like, fine. If you don't like it, fine. Like, we're all gonna die anyway, so I don't give a fuck about what you think. Like, right, fine. But I think the most important lesson I learned from that is it actually adds a little bit of IP, a little bit of sauce to what you're doing, and it helps people like recognize, your podcast is about to start. It's like a familiarity thing, and I think back to as well Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. When his theme song starts, the episode's about to begin. It just gets you in the zone, and I think it actually adds a lot more weight to content than people might give credit for. And I think one thing that also helps in my case is that I, as the host, am actually spitting the bars, so it makes it a bit more personable. But I think even if you get someone else to do it, if it's catchy, if it's something that gets people, moving a little bit, then it's good for your podcast. And so lesson number 8, if you can have a custom-made theme tune for your podcast, I would strongly recommend it. Tip number 9, consistent practice makes perfect eventually, or close to perfect. So it kind of goes back to my first point about being shit when you start. One of the things you'll notice is if you are consistently practicing and consistently doing the podcast, you will improve. Just like with anything, you'll start to notice the nuances of when you add pauses, the way you ask questions, the way you interact with your guest, how you steer conversation so that it's not only interesting for the both of you in it, but for people that are listening. Asking questions that may be a little bit uncomfortable to find out something new, or if not, at least you've given the viewers a chance to try, find out what that information is. All these little things are things that you're going to just notice as you keep going. So if you are consistent, then you will be able to start improving on those things. And I've noticed for myself that when I've taken breaks, I have to relearn some of these lessons and little nuances again as I go along. And over the last few weeks, as I've been more consistent, those things have been easier to either pick up again or just are now default in my mind. And I can feel within myself, and when watching back on my content, things getting better, especially, because it is quite hard to watch back on yourself, and it's hard to look back on yourself sometimes and watch your content, especially if you're not used to hearing yourself speak or be on camera. But those things just become easier with practice and with consistency. So practice makes close to perfect, let's say. And again, this is feedback that I hope I'm listening to for myself, as well as hopefully things that will help you when and if you start. So the last tip that I have for you, which may or may not be something that you've thought about in approaching starting a podcast, I would say that the most important thing is to focus on topics that you enjoy, as opposed to doing content that gets clicks, so to speak. And the reason I say that is because sometimes it can feel, especially when you watch other podcasts that focus on other topics. For example, myself, I like watching podcasts about football, or podcasts about the urban or black London scene, or watching podcasts about specific musicians. And while I get so much value from watching them, and I love watching them, they're really entertaining, I really enjoy them to some degree, I don't think I would enjoy necessarily talking about some of the topics that those podcasts focus on in my conversations. I don't know, I just really enjoy the stories that people have about picking up a new skill set or trying something new, and then what they did to work and improve on that. And I think if you can find the thing that you really enjoy doing, it makes it easier, because you're putting in a lot of your time and effort into it to start with. And if you're not enjoying it, it's going to be very difficult to keep going. And if you don't find that format that fits with something that you actually enjoy, as opposed to what it can get you, I personally believe that it will be very difficult to actually just stay on the process. And so I would say that it's definitely important to focus on the things that you enjoy. And coming towards the end of this episode, I've really enjoyed actually sharing the 10 things that I wish I knew before I started a podcast. It's actually been quite enjoyable. I was a bit wary before starting this that, I didn't have the right, or I didn't have the XP or the clout necessarily to share this. But at the same time, I've done quite a few episodes now, which I feel could give value to someone who's starting off at zero, or hasn't really thought about it, but has flirted with the idea in their mind. If those people watch it, I think they'll definitely get some help from this. And if you have, please like the video, leave a comment for me to let me know how you feel about it. And I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. As I usually say, there are other podcasts coming soon. I know I said I've got one booked, but hopefully I'll have a few more other guests confirming in the next few weeks. Allow them, because it's Christmas, innit? But I really hope you've enjoyed. If you are interested, please go check out my other podcasts. I like chatting with people who are in the creative industry, people like musicians, singer-songwriters, athletes, painters, people that work in the journalism field. And there's a lot of value that I think, even if you're not working in those industries, that some of the stories about overcoming adversity, improving in skills, and how to take advantage of opportunities, I think there's a lot of value there for people to learn from. So I've been your host, Dami Edun. Thanks so much again for listening or watching the Garden of Edun podcast. And I look forward to seeing everybody on the next episode with a guest in tow, and I'm sure they'll have a very insightful story to share with everyone. In the meantime, Happy New Year, and I will see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.